Okay, so I want to comment a bit about this incident in the Mansion House yesterday in central London. The Mansion House speech is a black tie event that I understand is given once or twice a year by the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. In this particular case, it was Philip Hammond, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's, as I understand it, quite a formal event. It's to raise speeches on fiscal policy, on well, it's a ceremonial thing. It's quite formal, and anyway, it's not something that just anyone can show up to. So, when the Chancellor was making the speech, a group of women, I guess it would have been about 10 to 20 of them, from Greenpeace, barged in and started shouting. They were obviously there to protest, um, and this story has kind of spiraled into something bigger. It's become a kind of gender debate, and this is why. The Conservative MP Mark Field, seeing one of the protesters running past their table, he got up and he physically tried to restrain her. He got her by the back of the neck and quite forcefully escorted her out and told two women, "Please remove this person." Um, Now, I'll be honest, my first instinct was it was a little heavy handed and he shouldn't have done it that way. And he looked quite angry. He was clearly quite irked off by it. But I've considered this a bit more and I've looked at the debates that are raging online. I mean, the LBC channel has like 2,000 views, 2,000 comments already. Um, well, Mark Field's already been suspended, even though he immediately apologised. Um, I think there's a lot of problems with this. We live in an era where politicians have been violently attacked. And I'm not just talking about the milkshake incidents, I'm talking about more serious things. The Cox assassination, of course, but there was also an incident, and I've been quoting this in the debates because I think it's relevant. 10 years ago, well, 9 years ago, the Labour MP Stephen Timms was knifed in the neck in his constituency office by a young hijabi woman. Now, this is important because a lot of the angle of the people who are attacking Mark Field is because, oh, she's a poor little defenseless woman. And it's this naive sexist assumption that women cannot be violent or capable of doing dangerous things. There was a very controversial case, and I'll be probably making a video on that. Young Egyptian woman brutally attacked in Nottingham last year by a girl gang. It was a case that disgusted many people, including myself, and the attackers weren't even given a sentence. I do think that there is still double standards in society with violent women versus violent men. Now, some people could say Mark Field should have left the security, but there is an obvious follow up. Where the hell was security? I mean, to me, this is an event, a formal event, where the second most powerful person in the country is generally considered to be the Chancellor was speaking. Why did it take the security so long to respond? How could these women have got so far inside the building, right up to close to where the Chancellor was speaking? That's a major security breach. You would think people would have had some sort of passes or something. Now, their apologists are saying, oh, well, they were wearing red dresses and sashes saying climate change, as if that automatically qualifies them as harmless. At best, it's rude. It's not peaceful. You know, this idea that barging into an event uninvited and shouting over people is peaceful. It's not. It may not be violent per se, but it sure as hell isn't peaceful. I mean, this is the problem with Greenpeace in particular. They seem to think that dialogue's irrelevant. Let's just shout as loud as we can. They're a bunch of infantile, exhibitionist, eco anarchists, and they seem to think they could do whatever they want. And the thing I find very galling about Greenpeace, the same with Extinct Rebellion, their go to is, oh, but the The planet is dying. That's a bigger issue. It actually ignores the fact that the British government is doing more than many other countries. As the Chancellor pointed out, there's a goal to cut carbon emissions to zero by 2050. Now, they might say that's too late, but the sort of target they're looking for, 2025, is simply unrealistic. Regardless, whatever you think of the targets and the rights and the wrongs and the policies, barging into an event uninvited is not a peaceful act. And here's the thing, there are people, no matter how Mark Field would have done that, if he grabbed her by the wrist or the arm, people would have said, oh, he has no right to put his hands on her. Like I say, in the context that we're in, this happened in a matter of seconds. How were the guests there to know what was going on? How were they to know what the agenda of these women was? Just because it says climate change doesn't mean that it's going to be a peaceful protest. How do they know that these couldn't weren't necessarily fanatics replicating or being influenced by Joe Brand's so-called joke? You know, there are some fanatics out there, left and right, and in the current environment where emotions are high, you cannot give someone the benefit of the doubt in a matter of seconds. I take the view, if you're going to barge into an event, you take the consequences. I have some very strong views about things. Believe me, sometimes I would love to barge into certain events, but I couldn't complain if security forcefully removed me. And I watched several videos of this. When the security did act, they were doing so in a pretty gentle way. It's not like they were body slamming these women. Mark Field wasn't doing that. Okay, maybe he shouldn't have took her by the neck in that way, but really, let's look at this in context. He wasn't punching her, he wasn't throwing her to the ground. Maybe it was a bit forceful, and maybe he should have left it to security, but security, frankly, should have been there. And I'm sorry, but equality means equality. Why would it be okay if that was a man? Because Mark Field, being a man, is physically stronger. Therefore, he should just, oh well, we'll just let her go past. Even though the Chancellor is meters away, what if that had been an assassination attempt? And you might think that's hyperbole, but like I say, in the current environment, and given how animated environmental activists are these days, who's to say? So I'm on the side of saying, well, maybe Field was a bit overzealous in how he responded to that. But, you know, these protesters really have no right to be playing the victim. They're the ones who barge into the event. I mean, I hope they're going to face some sort of consequences, at least fines or something. Um, it just seems to me, if you're of the view that nothing should have happened, that they should have been allowed to barge in, the Field is totally in the wrong. Let me put it to you this way. If he'd done nothing, or even if he'd taken a different approach, like he kind of blocked her way, there are people who are basically saying that because he's a man and she's a woman, you know, he can't do anything, right? They will frame it that way no matter what approach he would have taken. And that I find a little bit galling. Let's put things in context. She was not seriously injured, okay? I think Field was a bit foolish to respond the way he did. But put it this way, if she had been a violent attacker or a terrorist, and yes, there are women terrorists, let's say she was, then he would potentially be a hero. So, should he have been suspended? I don't think he should. I think suspending him makes him look like the villain. And in this current environment, as far as I'm concerned, it's these protesters who are the villains. You know, this was not a peaceful protest. Peaceful isn't barging into a place and yelling at the top of your lungs. Greenpeace isn't interested in dialogue. And it's you cannot always hide behind this, well, we're doing it for the planet, so, you know, we're wiser than the rest of you. There's consequences to actions, and if you're going to barge into an event uninvited, there's consequences. So I'm sorry, I don't see these women as victims. I mean, my goodness, if this was America, they would have been tasered onto the ground. I think under the circumstances, I would say Mark Field was firm. I wouldn't say he was brutal, no. And to those women and those virtue signaling men who are really saying, oh, he's a brute, it's terrible, it's terrible. I would say, what if she was armed? There are violent women in society. So let's just drop the sexist nonsense. Oh, she's a poor little woman. Yeah, she's physically weaker, but that's really the only mitigating factor. That is it. She barged into an event along with the other women that she wasn't invited to. People had, didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what their intentions were. So, for goodness sake, put some responsibility on the protesters.